Hello, friends, and welcome back to NintenGems, the Nintendo podcast where we talk about Nintendo games, both new for the Switch and some retro games, which we call our NintenGem of the Week. I am one of your hosts, Brayden, and we have a special guest co-host with us here this week. He's been on the show before.
Who is it?
Oh, let's find out. Open the door. It's Connor, my brother.
Hello, I'm Connor. I'm his brother. Or he's my brother. It depends on how you see it.
Yeah, it's all about perspective. But, we're super stoked to have you back on the podcast. You not only have contributed knowledge, but you also contributed our theme song, so thank you for that. It's probably fading out as we speak.
Goodbye, theme song.
See ya.
See ya.
Well, welcome back, though. We are happy to have you. What's been up in the meantime?
Thank you. It was great to be back. Not much. I mean, just the whole COVID quarantine stuff. I've had a lot of time to play a lot of games, Nintendo and otherwise. Just kicking it, I guess.
Yeah, man. All right. Well, let's go ahead and just get right into the meat of the episode, I'd say. You want to go ahead and talk about what we're playing for the past week or so?
For sure. You first.
All right, I can do that. So I have been following a game for over a year that they announced was going to be remastered. It is actually one of our favorite GameCube games of all time that we spent many an hour with, and they just kept delaying this remaster, and I was getting frustrated. And really, they only announced a release date for it probably about a month before it finally dropped. But without further ado, I'm talking about Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, and in this case, the remastered edition. Have you been following this game at all?
I have. You mean like the development of it, like the release schedule, sort of?
Yeah, kinda. Have you been interested in picking it up?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but I would say if this game were not being remastered, it would probably make the list of NintenGems someday on this podcast, right? Like the GameCube version.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah.
At this point, that this remaster does kind of like rule it out because it makes it way too relevant to be
Right.
considered just a gem, like you said, I guess. But it's a GameCube cult classic.
Yeah, it's weird how it's a Final Fantasy game, and Final Fantasy is such a huge series, but it is it is a cult classic. Like so few people had it, played it, had the necessary equipment to play it, I guess, which we can get into. And the people
Yeah.
that did play it loved it so much, and it's like almost like it's like an insular little community almost.
Right. So I guess let's get into, for those of you who haven't played it, some of kind of just what makes this Final Fantasy entry so unique from the rest of them. So sorry, side tangent here. The remaster is very faithful to the original. The graphics look great. The frames per second is way updated, and it just moves smoothly and beautifully. But so a lot of what we're going to be talking about applies to both this remastered version as well as the GameCube version. I just kind of wanted to get that out there.
Sure.
But yeah, so what makes this Final Fantasy entry so unique is, first off, it's not a turn-based RPG. It is an action RPG, I guess. What would you call it?
Yeah, I'd say so. I would say action RPG. It's really light on the RPG elements.
Right.
Like your characters really don't have many stats. You don't really level up. The way you upgrade your character, as it were, is pretty very simple and very
I feel like I've
rudimentary.
heard it described as Diablo light. And so I think that's a very good
Yeah.
way to describe
Yeah, that's
how the
true.
dungeons play out, at least how like the action portions play, which for the record is not necessarily the best part of
Mhm.
the game. So but
Ooh,
yeah, that is
interesting.
what differentiates this Final Fantasy from many of the other entries that were traditionally turn-based.
Mm.
Then another strange quirk about this game, which is not necessarily Final Fantasy related, but I would call it a barrier of entry to playing the game, at least in multiplayer mode, would be that it required the Game Boy Advance cables. Do you remember that? You want
Y
to
yeah.
tell us about that?
Yeah, for sure. It was originally for the GameCube, I guess, as we might have said, and you can play it solo. You can play with just one player and just have a GameCube controller and play it that way. You can play through the whole game by yourself if you want, but it is meant
Right,
to be
right.
a an up to 4 players co-op experience. Like you're meant to have three friends,
Mhm.
like go through the entire
And
adventure.
create your characters together.
Yeah, and, like, you create your character, you kinda make your own story in a way. The plot kinda follows a through line eventually, but you start off, like, with your own
Right.
created characters and your own party, and you're meant to play the entire game with this set of friends, this party. But the original GameCube version, you couldn't just use 4 regular GameCube controllers. You had to use this cable for some I mean, for a good reason.
Which is just dumb, dude.
No, it's
What?
cool. It's cool.
Okay.
It's cool that it because okay, it's so weird to explain. You use this cable to connect your Game Boy Advance to the GameCube, and so to play the game
Right.
with 4 total players, everybody would have to bring their own Game Boy Advance, let alone and then you would also have to have 4 of those very specific and, like, even at the time, not, like, amazingly easy to
Easy to
find.
find.
Yeah, like cable, like linking the GameCube to the Game Boy Advance. So, like, especially today, if this remaster didn't exist, to get the entire Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles experience, you would be dropping a pretty penny.
Right.
But and I
Uh-huh.
and finally, I will say that it's cool that it works that way, if only because the Game Boy Advance
Uh-huh.
is used in a way that your map like the map screen for each dungeon shows up on your Game Boy Advance. It gives you each player like specific
Mhm.
information to follow and
It's like very much a rudimentary Wii U gamepad
yeah,
kinda thing.
definitely. And like that's like when the Wii U came out, everybody was like Crystal Chronicles HD, like Crystal Chronicles remaster or something. And it never came, obviously, but we have it now.
Right.
And and we can get into the multiplayer aspect because I guess I should also concede I haven't played this remaster. I don't have it. Braden does.
Mhm.
I'm very nostalgic and faithful about the original, and I'm curious to see what the differences and similarities are. But yes, apparently multiplayer is just more streamlined this time. You don't need a Game Boy Advance of your own, thankfully.
Right. And actually, an interesting bit is so this remaster was released on all major consoles, I believe, including so I know PlayStation, I know Switch, and I know mobile.
Mhm.
I'm not positive about
I
Xbox.
don't think so, actually.
But what's interesting is yeah, maybe not. But all 3 of those versions have a demo version where you're able to play I wanna say the majority of the dungeons with your friends. Like, you don't get to create your own custom character, you don't necessarily get to do it is a free light version,
Okay.
but I don't know, I just think it's weird that well,
It,
it's not weird, I think it's interesting that they went for that model,
uh-huh.
and, I mean, I did shell out $30, so to have a friend just be able to pop in and kinda lend a hand with a free version is interesting.
Right. And I it's crossplay between all versions, right? Like that's the appeal too.
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome.
It is. It's really cool. I guess let's get into yeah, how this multiplayer plays out when you really get into it. So, in my mind, when I think of Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, I genuinely do think of playing solo. I know we've played together
Mhm.
a handful of times, but
Sure.
I think of having my Moogle, my little floating friend carry the chalice for me,
Sure.
which you don't get that luxury if you're playing with friends.
Mhm.
Um, and so, like, that's how I picture it, and so I started off this game, playing solo like I always kinda have, and I got a certain distance, and then I just wanted to kinda see what it was like to play with other people,
Mhm.
and so I turned on my multiplayer option, and dude, I don't know, I'm probably a quarter of the way into the level. I had 3 other teammates, and we were just balling through this level. It was amazing. It was I was so surprised by how integral the multiplayer almost felt
Sure.
to the game, enjoying the game,
It
like, and it includes some strategy,
sure. Oh,
uh,
yeah, like,
with
combining
spell
spells.
casting and coordination.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's very interesting. The problem comes with, like, the multiplayer system and how it's set up, and I think that's where a lot of the negativity comes from online about this remastered game. It has not been received well, and a lot of it is about the multiplayer.
Right. So, riddle me this. The main complaint maybe not the main complaint, one of the big complaints I've heard is that, like, those people that helped you out in the dungeon that dropped in, you are playing that dungeon because that's the dungeon you are on, like, in the story, and that's what you need to complete to proceed in the main game. But the other players that drop into your dungeon them helping you beat that dungeon does not advance their game, does it? That's what I've heard.
That is correct. And again, like I said, that's where the majority of the complaints have come from.
Mm,
It comes from people wanting to play with their friends, wanting to match story beat for story beat, literally be sharing a file.
right.
They thought that was going to be what they were going to be able to do, but unfortunately, only one player can really profit off of the story progression when you clear a dungeon, and the rest kind of simply receive like stat boosts and things like that.
Okay, so there is motivation to.
Oh yeah, dude, I'm grinding through some of the older dungeons just to boost up my Yuke's magic
Oh, you.
spell points.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, dude, I'm a mage, and so like I'm grinding through some of these
I mean, yeah, no.
levels. I'm just joining other people's parties to be able to claim the artifacts at the end and gain the stat boost.
Mhm,
And so I mean, me not having a friend that I'm trying to coordinate with, I'm having a blast being able to drop in and out of these people's parties and requesting help when I want it.
mhm.
But I do understand the complaints for people who, if me and you had bought this game together, we would be disappointed.
Oh, yeah, and, like, I mean, that's kinda where I mean, that makes it make sense to me, like, if you need a stat boost, you can drop into somebody's game real quick, help them out, and get, like, a little bump and have some fun with it,
Yeah.
but I
Are you
do
there?
think that sounds like it does kind of go against the spirit of the original game, where you're, like, just that your caravan, your four-player caravan going through the whole adventure together, like, that's the theme, that's, like, the thing, you know what I mean?
Is how the story even frames it.
Yeah, exactly, and, like, the story, like, especially later on, like, it's about, like, the theme of the game is, like, making memories, and, like, even at the end of the game, you have to, like, remember things that happened, and, like, that means more, I think, when the players are all together doing the whole thing together, and I
Right.
mean, I just think that's beautifully laced into the game, like, organically, and I feel like that's also kind
Mhm.
of missing with that new matchmaking system, kind of how it works. I don't know, but I mean, it does sound like it works and is fun. Like, you've had success with it?
Yeah. I just wanna give a shout out to, like, Lily and Zuzu, like, my 2 friends that I mean, we've chosen to follow each other, which is, like, the friend system,
Okay,
and so I get all their invites and everything, and, I mean, we've played together several times, we communicate, through the little quick chat, and I look forward to seeing if they're online, so, there's a little bit of companionship, of bonding, but you're
sure.
definitely correct in that, like, you're not starting a story together. Well, and you kind of mentioned how the story really leans into the caravan and the party system kind of. I just wanted to the story really ties the whole game together, including the gameplay, the way that
Mhm,
you traverse the map, and even the aesthetic, you know what I mean? Like I'm just kind of picturing the crystals in the middle of towns. Like
mhm.
so many fantasy towns, I'm sure have crystals in the middle, but Crystal Chronicles has a darn good reason why there's a massive one.
Yeah.
It's to hold off the miasma. It's a beautiful world.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's a Final Fantasy game, and Final Fantasy, if you know it already or if you don't, you kind of think of just like it's a Japanese RPG series. You think of more kind of anime-esque things, turn-based, but this one kind of meets it in the middle with like Western RPG because it's all very Celtic, kind of like
Mhm.
Celtic folklore and like Renaissance. Like all the character designs and like all the villages and stuff are very like rustic, and all the music is played on like lutes and flutes and like tambourines and like
The
hand
music is so
drums.
good.
The music is beautiful and like never compromises that aesthetic. Like it's just like fully
Mhm.
committed to like this very Renaissance,
Yeah.
very I mean like Celtic folklore setting. It's just beautiful and very like unique for the kind of game that it is. And yeah, like you mentioned the plot, like I think we mentioned that from the outset you kind of create your character and you kind of set out on a caravan like with your created characters. The theme is about like an adventure with your friends and you're making memories and you're using these crystals, hence the chronicles, to keep this miasma that's taking over the world at bay. This crystal you carry around, and in these bigger crystals that are in villages hold off the miasma, and you go around with your caravan around the world collecting more crystals and collecting this essence called myrrh that fuels the crystals. But eventually, with the plot being what it is, like a plot, You find out like what's causing the miasma, and you end up stopping it. Making memories is like interlaced with that. I think is just so beautiful, and like the aesthetic is just gorgeous, even for the GameCube.
The graphics were definitely pretty mind blowing for a GameCube game.
The Switch hold version holds up with that, like HD, the bump in graphics.
Definitely. I mean, it is just a remaster. It's not like a remake or anything, and so it's the same models, but you know the FPS is there and it looks smooth and it's still just as we've kept on saying, you know, the beauty and really just it was a game that had very strong graphics for the GameCube. So it looks okay, you know, even for Switch. It's $30 on Switch, which for some of you listening might be a bit of a steep price tag. So
Mm.
definitely, you know, listen to what we're saying, maybe watch some videos, but it's a wonderful game if Diablo Light or, you know,
Yeah,
Celtic fantasy sounds appealing, or if you're
totally.
just a Final Fantasy fan.
I would say it's a little. It might be a hard sell to like core gamers if you're looking for like an in-depth action RPG experience. But
Mhm.
I think the simplicity of the gameplay is very fun and like kind of elegant in its own way. And I think the aesthetic, the kind of Celtic, as we keep saying, kind of thing, and the story makes it a game worth visiting. If
Right.
even if the gameplay doesn't like hook you completely.
Sure. Well, and I would definitely say there's also a demo. So I guess
Oh
that's
yeah,
the perfect test is just test it out.
yeah. That the mobile version is free for like the first 13 dungeons or something.
Yeah, yeah. And I know the Switch has a demo as well.
Oh
So
really?
hop on.
Well
Yeah,
dang,
yeah, yeah. Give it a shot.
sweet.
All right. Well, so that's I've been playing Crystal Chronicles and I am loving it. What have you been playing the past little while?
Obviously, always persistently, consistently playing Super Smash Bros. Online, just to pass the
Yeah.
time, just getting those, keeping my skills
Mhm.
fresh. I am very proud to say I have 12 characters in Elite Smash.
Dork. A little
That's
humble
me.
brag.
Yes, sir. 12 of 80 plus characters. I'm proud of it. I've won a tournament or two.
That is
Get
wild.
hop off. I'll admit the most recent update they did make, they like lowered the cap for elite status. Like it is
Oh,
easier
right.
to get in, but I'm still
Mhm.
proud nonetheless. I'm grinding, bro.
Like 12 more than me, I think.
Who's your closest? Who's like your main?
You know, like my main, I claim Greninja, but I think Young Link is probably a little bit closer. But I mean, and I don't know, man.
Sure.
Who's your main these days?
Samus is a always going to be my main of all mains if I need to kick some tail. But I do love playing
Hmm.
Incineroar. I like Meta Knight. Um, always love Terry. Terry's uh, close to Samus in terms of just like if
Brutal.
I want to make a statement, if I want to make a count.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I just like playing with everybody. If I'm playing for fun with anybody, I'm always choosing random, truthfully. And that sounds really cocky, but it's a lot of fun.
Absolutely, and a great way to round your skills. But
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
no.
But other than, I mean, always Smash, just getting games in there. I got this game recently that I believe you mentioned on the show. I don't know how in depth you got into it, but it's
Hmm.
a lovely little indie game called Baba Is You.
Yeah, we did. We did talk about that a little bit. I probably puked up some nonsense words that could not describe it well at all. Do you want to take a crack at it?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a weird. It's hard to describe. At its core, it's just like a block pushing puzzle game. It's 2D. You play as a little character on the screen, and you push blocks around like a grid area and solve
Hmm.
puzzles, like pushing blocks different places to make paths and stuff. But the main mechanic of the game is like it's basically just like logic and coding. Like the rules
Hmm.
of the game show up in the game like area as blocks. So there's a block that says Baba, a block that says is, and a block that says you. And Baba is like your little player character. It's a little sheep. But
Hmm.
those three words are blocks that you can move around on in the area. So if you move you away from Baba is, if you move it away, then suddenly you can't move because you are no longer Baba.
You are not Bubba.
You have to restart. Yeah, you have to restart the level. And there's 3 blocks that are like wall is stop. So if there's a wall in your way, you can move stop out of that sentence, and then suddenly you can walk through the walls. And
Mm-hmm.
you're basically just manipulating the rules of the game within the game to solve puzzles and get to the goal.
Crazy mind bending stuff.
Yeah, and then like there's like flag is win. So you can move flag and put Baba there, and Baba is win, and then you win. That's you win the game. You don't have to get to the flag.
Right. And so creative.
Yeah, like it gets so complicated, and like just because you're manipulating the rules themselves, it feels like different than any other kind of puzzle game to solve the puzzle, because
Mm-hmm.
it feels like you're outsmarting the developers in a way.
Right. Right.
Because it's like
Like surely they
it's
didn't plan for this.
yeah, because I mean, yeah, it's sometimes it feels accidental. Like you make these weird rules. You make the goal into like an enemy, and then you hit the enemy, but you win anyway. And then it feels like you're doing it on accident, like the developers didn't intend it. But simultaneously,
Uh-huh.
I get so stumped that I just feel stupid, stupid as all get out.
Oh, dude. I mean, wherever I was at, like whenever I discussed it on the previous episode, whatever
Mm,
level I was on, I'm undoubtedly still there because I mean, like I peaked. I had
sure,
to tap out. I mean,
that's
maybe I ought to look one up and then I can move on and try another. But
right.
yeah, it's freaking hard.
It is. I've been cruising. There's like I'm on the third like world. There's like little worlds on like a map, little groups of levels, and I'm on like the third world on the map.
Hmm.
And I've been cruising pretty well so far. I've had a few stumpers, but with the way that it's ramping up, I wouldn't be surprised if I just have to drop it soon enough, just because it's too smart for me.
Well, keep it up, big brain. I'm sure you can. I'm sure you'll get plenty far.
We'll see. I don't know. I'll check back next episode that I'm on, and see if I'm still stuck.
Yeah. Anything else to say about Baba Is You?
Not really. I guess check it out if you like puzzle games. At least like watch like a trailer or something, just because the concept is so difficult to visualize. I feel like.
Right, right. Yeah, and it's $15, I
Yeah,
think.
15 on the eShop. I haven't seen it on sale yet, I don't think, but
Mhm.
I mean, definitely worth your time whenever it is, if it ever is.
For sure. Well, shall we get into the NintenGem of the week? You've kind of brought us a weirdo this week. It is definitely a NintenGem.
Oh yes, it's a gem. It's a gem. Nintendo, like we're there are no Mario's or Zeldas here in this episode, really. Like
That's true.
Final Fantasy and the gem that I have, it's kind of an obscure episode by nature, but yes, and it's an oddball. It's got a lot of explaining to do, but this week's Nintendo gem is the Mystical Ninja starring Goemon for the Nintendo 64.
All right.
And I guess the first disclaimer I should say is Goemon, the Mystical Ninja starring Goemon. Goemon is the titular character. He's the protagonist, and
Mhm.
he's the main character of this historic, ongoing video game series. But it is
Yeah.
technically pronounced Goemon. It's a heavily Japanese themed series, and the character's name is Goemon. It's spelled Goemon, and to pronounce it otherwise is incorrect, but
Mhm.
I'm going to do it anyway. Just because we grew up with the
All right.
Gomon games, and that's like what we're used to, and it's easier to say, I think.
We'll get through the episode faster. Don't worry.
Yeah, Goemon is just like weird to say for my underdeveloped American palate,
Yeah.
as it were.
So why who is this Gomon? Why did you bring him here to us?
An excellent question. For American gamers, Gomon is he might not be so recognizable. So he's essentially a pop culture icon in Japan at this point. He's like equivalent to Mario in terms of recognition in Japan. And there are
Right.
dozens and dozens of games. There's an anime, a manga, there's like
Mhm.
books, there's I mean just merchandise out the wazoo. Gomon is just an icon, a gaming icon
Mhm.
in Japan. He's essentially Konami, the developer. He's essentially their mascot over there. They also make Castlevania, Gradius, Metal Gear Solid, Silent Hill, like all these series. But Goemon is really like their family friendly like Mario that they use for branding. However, among those dozens and dozens of games that he has, we got four in the US ever. And
Yes.
Mystical Ninja Starring Goemon is, I believe, the second of those. And it's
Right.
pretty darn good, dare I say.
Yeah. So the first Gomon game that the US received was, what is it? Mystical Ninja? What's it called? For the SNES?
Yeah, it's the Legend of the Mystical Ninja for the Super Nintendo, and it's a little weird. The translation is a little funky because there is dialogue in the game, and they refer to the characters as Mister Ying and Doctor Yang. When in the actual series, it's Goemon, and he has a friend named Ibizumaru, but I guess those are just a little too Japanese and hard to pronounce for Americans.
Let's go for
Uh,
yin yang.
yeah,
That's
let's just
not
make it like possibly a little racist.
not a bad
Just
idea.
see what sticks. And then yeah, so that was the first, and then the other three we got Mystical Ninja, starring Goemon, which is just the same almost exact name, which is not confusing at all for the N64. Then a sequel for to this game called Goemon's Great Adventure for the N64 as well. And then there is
Mhm.
another. I think it's just called Mystical Ninja Starring Goemon 2, like in addition
Oh my
for the
gosh.
Game Boy. So it's got a weird history for the Americas, obviously, and it's very
Right.
confusing. But in Japan, it's just the series is just called Ganbare Goemon or Fight on Goemon, so it's a little easier
Fight
to keep
on.
track of. Yeah, and like they have like
Uh,
the sequels are like numbered and stuff to make it easier, you know.
right. We just got the kinda, "Well, let's ship it overseas, why not?" And
Yeah.
they
Well, I won't say that they didn't care about like the Americanization, cause which we'll get into, but like because like the level of the so obviously if you haven't caught on with like the weird what they've changed and what they haven't so far with the series for American audiences, it's a very very Japan themed series. Uh, in
right.
a, in addition to it just like being mostly localized to Japan, the series like the setting of the games itself is in a like cartoonish, wacky, over the top version of
Mhm.
uh like medieval Japan, like feudal Japan, Edo period.
Mhm.
In the same way that Mario is like a plumber, but he really doesn't do any plumbing in any games, you know? He's just kind of like a hero.
Mhm.
Goemon is the same way. Ishikawa or Ishikara Goemon is a like a Japanese folklore character, like a myth character who's like essentially Japan's Robin Hood. He's
Right,
like
yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
thief, steals from the rich. But the Goemon,
They do not focus on that in the games at all.
not at all whatsoever. It's just he's just like a hero character who saves the world a bunch, and wacky villains come into Edo, Japan, and mess things up, and he has to defeat them and right the wrongs and stuff. It's all extremely over the top and wacky, and the reason that so few of the games made it over here is because of that setting. Like so many of the characters and enemy designs and like is based on Japanese folklore, like Japanese mythology, and so many of
Uh-huh.
those concepts just don't translate. Like we
Right.
shoot, what's the yokai? Like the concept of yokai, like Japanese ghosts and monsters,
Uh-huh.
we just don't have here, and that yokai make up like
Mhm.
most of the character designs and enemies and stuff.
That's interesting. I guess I hadn't, I hadn't related Gomon to that
Right.
concept of yokai before, but that is really interesting, like, because
Yeah.
that is such a pervasive kinda superstition, I guess, in Japan.
Hmm. Right. And I mean the series is also very anime influenced. Like it's very anime esque. Uh, which for the time, like the '90s, obviously America wasn't as accustomed to anime as it is now. So
Yeah.
it's not really surprising that it didn't catch on quite as much. Let alone the fact that it's set in Japan and so much of the theming is Japanese in and of itself.
So what makes it a gem? What 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 is so gem-like about it?
So this game in particular, the one we're talking about, The Legend of the Mystical Ninja Starring Goemon for the Nintendo 64. It's essentially like an open world action adventure game in the same vein as like Zelda Ocarina of Time, which y'all have talked about on the show,
Right.
right?
Yes, we definitely did.
Cool. So existing viewers who might not be as familiar with the games will have an idea of what that means, perhaps. Yeah, so it's an open world action adventure. You and the world is enormous. Like I would say 2 to 3 times the size of Ocarina of Time. It's just kind of more expansive. Like the fields are just bigger. Like it takes longer to just like run across a field than it does in Ocarina of
Uh-huh.
Time to get from point A to point
Right.
B. But yeah, the world is very big. You explore like the whole continent of Japan, as it were. And there's
Mhm.
dungeons. Like there's dungeons where you find items, use the items to clear it, and fight a boss at the end. It's very Zelda esque in its construction. You
Right.
unlock 4 different characters to play as. It is also a platformer. It's part 3D platformer, which is kind of what you'd expect from an
Yeah.
N64 game.
I was about to say, so the design and, like, the world and the layout, I guess you is definitely Zelda feeling, but the kinda the character movement and kinda the gameplay would almost be more like a Mario 64 type feel to it. Would
Yeah,
you say?
totally. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of exploration and puzzle solving, but there is also lots of platforming, lots of 3D platforming, and
Mhm.
yeah, it feels a lot more, kind of more like Banjo Kazooie, like that kind of collectathon
Oh, wow.
platforming.
That's a there you go.
You know what
That's
I
a good
mean?
one.
So it's got this nice fusion of different gameplay styles, and with the different characters to unlock, it kind of shakes up the gameplay. And the coolest part
Oh.
is, and this is a series staple. This happens. I guess I should also preface the series, like as the dozens of games exist in Japan. It's mostly 2D platformers, like side-scrolling platformers.
Uh-huh,
That's like historically what Gomon is.
SNES, Game Boy, etcetera.
Yeah, right. And so this game was kind of like the big break into 3D, like kind of like Zelda and Mario did, like finally expanding that concept into a huge 3D world.
Yeah.
And they kind of nailed it on the first track.
N64 is such a game changer.
It really is. They did it, they did it really well. But there's this one concept, this one idea in the Gomon games that even started on the Super Nintendo. But there are the dungeons in the game. There's like the main like levels that you play through, and at
Uh-huh.
the end of each level, at the end of each dungeon, there's a boss fight, which you fight like
Mhm.
normally with your character, and then after that boss fight, you hop into your mech, your mobile suit, your
Let's
giant
go.
robot. You hop into the cockpit of your giant robot and you fight another giant robot in first person,
Yes.
like in like a punch out kind of like almost first person shooter sort of segment.
Yeah.
It's
You're controlling both fists, you have some special attacks
yeah,
and,
you
like,
got like
a gun or
combos.
something like that.
Yeah, it plays like a fighting game. It's like suddenly this platformer turns
Mhm.
into like a first person like fighting game where you're duking it out with this other giant robot, which is just, I mean, that's just a testament to like a how like Japanese in theme it is, and like in its execution. Like I mean, like the Power Rangers kind of thing where like they
Yeah.
hop into a giant robot for the end of the episode to
Uh-huh.
fight the giant monster. Like it's the same exact thing. Like the villain turns into like a huge monster and you fight it one on one in a giant robot. And it even has like this intro sequence where the robot's getting like a symbol, just like the Megazords and Power Rangers. And there's even like a vocal theme
Mhm.
song for the robot that it plays. It's awesome. It's so good and just so silly and over the top. And
I
I
was
don't
about to
know
say just a great testament to, just how Japanese. I mean, what is more Japanese than giant fighting robots?
exactly.
And, like
And again, feudal Japan, like 1600s Edo Japan, but they're giant
yeah,
robots and aliens and lasers and all kinds of crazy stuff.
it's awesome.
It's so cool. And then the rest of the game just like follows suit. Like it's all just so wacky. There's a laugh track in the game.
Yeah.
There's a healthy amount of like literally there's a healthy amount of like dialogue in the game, lots of characters, lots of wacky
Mhm.
characters that like, and the jokes even in this American version still land for the most part, I think. I don't know how one to one the
I'll take your
translation
word
is.
for it.
Yeah. like for what it is, for what it can be.
I just remember playing this game as a kid, and I don't think I've ever made it very far on this game because it seemed very confusing at the time. And I don't know if that's because as a kid I was reading like strangely translated English, or maybe I just
Mm,
didn't read at all, or
sure,
you know what I
fair.
mean? I felt lost and it felt like a big wide open game, but I wonder how it would play for me these days.
I would say the translation is about as good as it can be. Japan, I mean, again, just like cultural icons, barriers, cultural differences aside,
Mhm.
Japan really loves puns.
Yeah.
So, and like the way they write the way their words and like text work, like a lot of the individual characters, the individual Japanese text characters will be like a syllable,
Mhm.
and so they'll like double up on those and make puns out of their words. And so that's really a lot of what the dialogue originally is in Japanese. And so you
I
can't
see.
quite make those same jokes in American English work. So
Yeah, yeah.
they kind of have to like write new ones and like make it might come out like a little sideways and like make not make a ton of
Mhm.
sense, but it usually for the most part still works. It's still like it's a really funny game, and there's again a laugh track in this dang game. Like you can't like name another game that does that.
A laugh
It's
track in case you missed the funny.
right, exactly, to let you know when you're supposed
Yeah.
to laugh. It's a solid game in its own right. It's and like I guess what you were mainly asking about, like as far as progressing through the game, there's still like some cultural language barriers, I guess, like in the same way that they called Goemon and Ibizumaru Mr. Ying and Dr. Yang in the earlier
Yeah.
games. Like there's just like different Japanese words that are a little difficult to pronounce or
Mhm.
memorize, like different locations and different character names
Sure,
that you
and
need to know and like look for in the world. It can be a little confusing for like
right.
players that aren't accustomed to that kind of thing. But I think
Yeah.
overall, it makes sense. Like it's a if you pay attention to the
Cohesive
dialogue,
experience.
yeah, it carts you through pretty at a pretty
Well,
nice
that's cool.
clip. Yeah, it's a solid game in its own right. If you can get past the absolute left field madcapness of its setting and its humor, and I mean just like yeah, and just like the general like archaicness of it being an N64 platformer.
Right.
It is a NintenGem, I firmly believe. The firmest confirmation I can make for it qualifying as a NintenGem is I'm going to dunk on
Mhm.
Nintendo a little bit.
Ooh.
Mystical Ninja Starring Goemon came out before Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time.
And
Like we've
that's pretty crazy.
that's huge. Ocarina of Time took like
Yeah.
years and years to develop, and obviously it came out perfect. It was worth the wait, but like I mean, Mystical Ninja kind of
Did it first.
yeah, I mean, like it took that. I mean, it made like the same formula as the original Zeldas, like dungeons. You look for keys and items, and you go
Mhm.
across a world, talking to characters and exploring new areas and stuff.
All in 3D?
It did it in 3D first. They came out the same year,
Uh-huh.
and Mystical Ninja was like several months before. It's pretty
That's
wild,
so bizarre.
and I mean, it just faded into obscurity. Nobody remembers Mystical Ninja. Nobody knows about it.
Right. At some
It
point, I think almost like a side-by-side comparison of those 2 games and, like, their mechanics could be called for. Like, that would be an interesting
oh,
study
definitely.
at the competition between those 2 games.
Maybe Mystical Ninja should be hailed as the greatest game of all time, don't you think?
Ooh, wow.
I think it
I
qualifies. It was there first.
it was there first. Fair enough.
I think I've mentioned it was a previous episode. We were talking about Super Smash Bros. And some DLC. And
Oh,
again,
right.
The Goemon series doesn't exist in America anymore, like almost in any capacity. But we got
Mhm.
a Goemon Mii Fighter costume in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate,
That's so wild.
which is
And that really was the episode you were on, right?
yeah, yeah. Oh, I was excited. I was jazzed. Like it's crazy that that happened.
Me Sword Fighter, right? Is he one of your 12 in Elite
Oh, you
Smash?
know it. You know it.
Goemon?
Absolutely.
Very nice.
It's
Alright, then I dub thee true fan.
why thank you. Like Gomon and Smash has just like been a dream since. Super Smash Bros. For the 64, like a pie in the sky, never ever happen dream. And I mean, this is good enough, you know?
Right. Well, and I think with us owning both of the N64 games as kids, we surely thought he was like a bigger character than clearly he was in the United States. Like he had
Oh,
such an
totally.
impact on our gaming, our
Yeah,
childhood gaming experience, but like, no one else had ever heard of him.
right. I mean, and again, like, I mean, Japan, I'm sure there was plenty of hubbub for him to show up in Super Smash Bros. Even back then.
Right.
But it's just crazy because even in Japan these days, the last like mainline Goemon title game that came out even in Japan was like 2006 for the DS. Like even
Mhm.
he's the series has been like mostly unheard from for a while now.
Right.
But we got that Mii costume, and I'm content.
Hope is restored. Well, maybe next time or just at some point in the future, we can do the sequel to this game, which is Goemon's Great Adventure, which, like I
Ooh,
said, is
yes,
another one of those big N64 games that we spent a lot of time in. And it's a great game in its own right, a little bit different in that it's like a 2D, it's like a
it's a side scroller.
2.5D platformer.
Hmm. I mean, it's tough. I think because I think I truthfully I like the sequel, Goemon's Great Adventure, more, but I think Legend of the
Oh,
Mystical Ninja Starring Goemon is a better starting point
sure.
for the series as a game.
Right.
But
You get a
hopefully,
better, bigger perspective of the series.
absolutely, it's in a lower barrier of entry. I think because
Mhm.
Goemon's Great Adventure is hard. It's a side-scrolling platformer and it's brutal.
Right.
But hopefully someday, when we are running out of NintenGems to cover, we can hop back on the Gomon series and cover it. I'd be down.
Yeah, man. Well, for those of you interested in playing this game, I'm seeing prices between 50 and 150 on the
Ooh,
internet, on
that's a
eBay.
steal.
Yeah, you think so?
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's interesting that it's so obscure here because there's really only you can either buy the cartridge or and you should never ever do this. You can emulate it because it never got put on the Virtual Console or any eShop.
right.
It's like the only ones that ever did were the Game Boy version was put on the 3DS eShop, and the Super Nintendo Mystical Ninja was is on like the Wii and Wii U Virtual Console, and I think maybe even on the Super Nintendo Switch collection thing.
Interesting. Maybe.
But
Yeah, I think you might be right.
maybe, regardless, I mean it's easier to find. But yeah, the Nintendo 64 titles, Mystical Ninja, Starring Goemon, and Goemon's Great Adventure, were never re-released. Still haven't. Um, So you can either shell out a couple $100 for the cartridges, or you can find a way to emulate it,
Yeah.
which you shouldn't. I
Never.
can
We cannot professionally condone. You can borrow the game. Mom says
yeah.
bring it back by Friday. Mhm.
Fun fact though, Goemon's Great Adventure, like full inbox copy, like we have from our childhood days,
Mhm.
is our most expensive and valuable game in our collection. Full stop.
That box is pristine. We gotta
It
keep it
is.
there.
But yeah,
You have anything else for Gomon, Connor?
man, I feel like I've talked about it so much already, and I could keep going because I love it so much. Man, I would say if you're a big fan of the Nintendo 64 and like that era of 3D platformers, and you think you've played them all but haven't done this one, give it a shot because it's a special one. It's wacky and weird and might surprise you, but it's worth the investment, I think.
And that is why we will log that into the NintenGems Hall of Fame.
Yes,
Welcome,
sir.
Gomon. Dun, dun, dun.
About time.
Yeah, well, and thank you, Connor, for being our special guest this week. You carried us through. Thanks for your wealth of knowledge.
Yes, absolutely. It was a pleasure to be on. Thank you for basically letting me talk about two gems, covertly, sort of.
Yeah, we kind of
It's
snuck that Crystal Chronicles in, but that's okay.
yeah, it's a new game.
Remastered. Do you have any personal projects you'd like to plug on your way out?
Yeah, you can hear my music at weave.bandcamp.com. That's WEAV. .bandcamp.com. I don't have a ton out right now.
Show
but
some love.
Yeah, support your boy. I'll have some new stuff soon, hopefully.
Yeah. It can't possibly be as good as the outro song we have going right now.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you guys so much for listening. My name is Braden. Over there we have
Connor.
And this has been NintenGems. Be sure to subscribe on all your favorite podcast platforms, like us on Facebook, Twitter, and we will see you next time. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.